The night sky over the sleepy suburbs of Seattle was shattered by a streak of fire, like a comet gone rogue, plummeting toward the earth with a roar that rattled windows and set off car alarms in the distance. Alex Harlan, a former Marine with scars from battles he'd rather forget, was nursing a glass of whiskey in his modest apartment, the kind of place where the walls were thin and the memories thicker. He'd left the service 3 years ago, trading desert sands for rainy streets, but the quiet never quite settled in his bones. That night, as he stared out at the storm clouds gathering, a thunderous crash echoed from the alley behind his building. It wasn't thunder, not the natural kind anyway. Curiosity, or maybe that old soldier's instinct, pulled him off the couch. He grabbed his jacket, slipped a knife into his boot, just in case, and headed out into the rain-slicked night. The alley was a mess of overturned trash cans and flickering streetlights, but there, amid the debris, was something that didn't belong. A sleek, metallic pod, glowing faintly with an otherworldly hum, half buried in the pavement like it had been dropped from the stars. Smoke curled from its edges, and as Alex approached, the hatch hissed open with a pneumatic sigh. Out stumbled a figure that made his heart skip a beat, not from fear, but from sheer, unadulterated awe. She was tall, graceful in a way that seemed to defy gravity, with skin as pale as moonlight and hair that cascaded like freshly fallen snow, shimmering under the street lamp's glow. Her ears tapered to delicate points, like those of an elf from some forgotten fairy tale, adding an exotic allure that was both enchanting and unnerving. She wore a form-fitting garment that looked like it was woven from liquid silver, hugging her curves in a manner that was elegant yet undeniably provocative, high-collared and flowing, but leaving just enough to the imagination to stir the senses. Her eyes, a vivid violet that pierced the darkness, locked onto his, wide with desperation. "Please," she whispered in a voice like silk over steel, her accent lilting and alien yet somehow perfectly understandable. "Help me, they're coming." Alex froze, his mind racing. Who was she? What was she? But before he could respond, distant sirens wailed, and she glanced skyward, fear etching her flawless features. Without thinking, he grabbed her arm, gentle but firm, and pulled her toward his building. "In here," he muttered, leading her up the stairs to his apartment. The door clicked shut behind them, sealing out the chaos, but trapping them in a tension that crackled like static electricity. Inside, the room felt smaller with her presence. She moved with a fluid grace, her silver attire catching the dim light from his lamp, accentuating the swell of her hips and the elegant line of her neck. Alex's pulse quickened. He wasn't blind to her beauty, but survival came first. "Who are you?" he demanded, keeping his voice low. "And who's after you?" She turned to him, those violet eyes searching his face as if weighing his soul. "I am Zyra, Princess of Xylo, heir to the throne of Zerathia." Her words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Zerathia? It sounded like something from a sci-fi novel, but the pod outside was no prop. "My ship was ambushed by rebels from our rival clans. I escaped, but they won't stop until they have me or my secrets." Alex rubbed his stubbled jaw, trying to process this. Aliens? Royalty? It was insane, but the evidence was standing right in front of him, radiating an aura that was equal parts regal and vulnerable. He glanced out the window, no signs of pursuit yet, but he knew better than to relax. "Okay, Princess," he said, his tone laced with skepticism but softened by her evident distress. "Sit down, you're safe for now, but we need to figure this out." Zyra hesitated, then lowered herself onto his worn couch, her posture straight and poised despite the circumstances. As she adjusted her garment, a faint shimmer rippled across the fabric, and Alex couldn't help but notice how it clung to her form, highlighting the gentle rise and fall of her breathing. She caught his gaze and offered a small, enigmatic smile. "You are kind, human. In my world, such acts are rare without expectation." He shrugged, pouring her a glass of water from the kitchen. "Call it habit. Name's Alex. Ex-soldier. Not exactly royalty, but I know a thing or two about running from trouble." He handed her the glass, their fingers brushing briefly, a spark of warmth that surprised him. Her skin was cool like polished marble, yet soft in a way that invited touch. As she sipped, the tension in the room shifted. Zyra set the glass down and leaned forward, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "There is something you must know, Alex. In Zerathia, when we seek true alliance or aid, we reveal our sincerity in ways your people might find unusual." Her cheeks flushed a faint lavender, and she stood, her hands fidgeting with the clasp at her collar. Alex's brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" With a deep breath, she met his eyes, her expression a mix of vulnerability and determination. "I'm not wearing anything underneath," she murmured, the words hanging between them like a forbidden promise. The air grew thick, charged with an unexpected intimacy. Alex's mind reeled. Was this some kind of seduction? A trap? But her gaze held no deceit, only earnest plea. He stepped back, hands raised. Whoa, hold on. I don't know what customs you have up there, but down here, that's not how we. She shook her head, a soft laugh escaping her lips, melodic and disarming. No, you misunderstand. In my culture, bearing oneself, literally, is a symbol of trust. No hidden weapons, no secrets. It's how royals prove their intentions are pure when forging bonds in desperate times. Her fingers hovered over the clasp, but she paused, reading his confusion. I offer this to you, Alex, as thanks for your shelter, and perhaps as a request for more. The revelation hit him like a wave, blending shock with a reluctant intrigue. This wasn't just an alien crash landing, it was a cultural collision, one that thrust him into a role he never imagined. Protector, confidant, maybe something more. Outside, the rain pounded harder, masking any approaching threats, but inside, the real storm was brewing between them. As the minutes ticked by, Alex found himself drawn into her story. Zyra spoke of Zerathia, a world of crystalline spires and endless auroras, where politics were as treacherous as the void of space. Her father, the king, had been overthrown in a coup, and she was the last hope for restoring peace. The rebels wanted her dead, or worse, captured to legitimize their rule. Her escape pod had been her only salvation, programmed to seek out habitable worlds, landing her here on Earth in his alley. He listened, captivated by her tales of interstellar wars and ancient rituals. Her voice wove through the room like a spell, her gestures animated, making her pointed ears twitch slightly with emotion. And all the while, that whispered confession lingered, adding a layer of forbidden allure to every word. Alex, who had sworn off complications after his tours of duty, felt a pull he couldn't ignore. Here was a woman, a princess from the stars, trusting him with her life. But trust went both ways. As dawn began to creep through the curtains, a low hum vibrated from outside, scanners perhaps, or drones from her pursuers. Zyra tensed, her hand instinctively reaching for his. They found me, she breathed. Alex's military training kicked in. He grabbed his old service pistol from the drawer, checking the clip. Not on my watch, stay here, I'll scout. She rose, her silver garment swirling around her like a second skin. No, we face this together. Your world is new to me, but your courage, it calls to mine. Their eyes locked, a silent vow forming in the dim light. Little did Alex know, this was just the beginning. A tangle of cultures, desires, and dangers that would test the very limits of what it meant to be human. As he cracked the door open, peering into the hallway, Zyra pressed close behind him, her presence an intoxicating mix of exotic scent and quiet strength. The building was silent, too silent, but the hum grew louder. Rebels from Zerathia, equipped with tech far beyond Earth's, were closing in. Alex's mind raced. How to fight an enemy he couldn't even comprehend? They slipped down the back stairs, hearts pounding in unison. Zyra's hand in his felt right, grounding him amid the absurdity. At the bottom, they burst into the alley where her pod lay mangled but still pulsing with faint energy. If I can repair the core, she whispered urgently, we can escape or at least signal for help. But shadows moved at the alley's end, silhouettes with glowing visors advancing with predatory grace. Alex pushed her behind the pod, raising his pistol. Get to work, I'll buy time. The first shot rang out, not from his gun, but there's a bolt of plasma that scorched the wall beside him. He returned fire, the crack of bullets echoing against the futuristic whine of their weapons. Adrenaline surged. This was war, but on home turf with stakes higher than any battlefield he'd known. Zyra worked frantically, her fingers dancing over holographic panels that materialized from the pod's surface. Almost. There, she muttered, her voice strained. Another blast grazed Alex's shoulder, searing pain flaring, but he gritted his teeth and fired back, dropping one assailant with a lucky shot to the knee. They were alien, all right, taller than humans, with armored suits that shimmered like oil on water. But they bled, just like anyone. In that chaos, Zyra's cultural revelation took on new meaning. Her trust wasn't just symbolic, it was a bridge between worlds. As she activated the pod's defenses, a shield bubble that enveloped them, Alex realized he was fighting not just for survival but for her, for this strange, beautiful being who had crashed into his life. The shield held as more rebels converged, their attacks bouncing off in sparks of light. Zyra turned to him, eyes shining. You are more than I expected, Alex, a warrior with a heart. He smirked through the pain. Flattery won't fix this mess. What's next? She smiled, a hint of mischief in her violet gaze. We improvise, like humans do best. As the battle raged on, their bond deepened, forged in fire and whispers. But the night was young, and the stars held more secrets yet to unfold. The shield flickered under relentless assault, and Zyra's face paled. "It won't hold forever. We need to move." Alex nodded, scanning for an exit. The alley led to a side street, but it was a gamble. "On 3, run for the car, it's parked around the corner." They bolted as the shield collapsed, plasma bolts whizzing past. Alex covered her, firing over his shoulder, his aim true from years of training. One rebel went down, clutching its side, but others pressed on, their voices a guttural alien tongue echoing commands. Reaching the car, Alex yanked open the door, shoving Zyra inside before sliding into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life, tires screeching as they peeled out. In the rearview, he saw the pursuers scrambling for their own vehicles, hovering discs that lifted silently into pursuit. "They're fast," Zyra warned, gripping the dashboard. Her hair whipped in the wind from the open window, and despite the danger, Alex stole a glance at her profile, ethereal, determined. "So are we," he replied, weaving through traffic. The city lights blurred as he pushed the old sedan to its limits, sirens now mixing with the alien hum. Zyra activated a small device from her garment's pocket, a communicator that projected a holographic map. "Head north. There's a forest where we can hide and repair." The chase intensified, the rebels' discs closing in, firing warning shots that exploded potholes in the road. Alex swerved, heart hammering, but a grin crept onto his face. This was alive, more than any desk job could offer. As they hit the highway, Zyra placed a hand on his thigh, a gesture of solidarity that sent a jolt through him. "Thank you," she said softly, "for believing in me." He glanced at her, the road ahead a ribbon of possibility. "Don't thank me yet. We've got a long night ahead." Little did he know how right he was. The stars above watched, silent witnesses to a love story written in the cosmos, where a human's grit met an alien's grace, and nothing would ever be the same. The highway stretched into the night, a ribbon of asphalt cutting through the rain-soaked darkness, the city's neon glow fading in the rearview mirror as Alex pushed the sedan to its breaking point. The hum of the alien pursuer's discs was a constant drone, like a swarm of metallic hornets closing in. Zyra's hand lingered on his thigh, her touch cool yet electric, sending a pulse of awareness through him that he tried to ignore. This wasn't the time for distractions, but her presence, her scent, like jasmine mixed with something unplaceably cosmic, made focus a battle in itself. The forest she'd mentioned was still miles away, and the rebels were gaining, their plasma bolts streaking past, one grazing the car's fender with a sizzling crack. Zyra's violet eyes darted to the holographic map flickering in her lap, its soft glow illuminating the curve of her cheekbones and the delicate points of her elfin ears. "Take the next exit," she said, her voice steady but laced with urgency. "It leads to a ravine. We can lose them there." Alex nodded, his jaw tight, and yanked the wheel hard, tires screeching as they veered off the highway onto a narrow, unlit road. The sedan bounced over uneven pavement, branches scraping the roof like skeletal fingers. He stole a glance at her, the silver fabric of her attire clinging to her form, shifting with every jolt of the car, accentuating the graceful lines of her body. Her words from the apartment echoed in his mind, "I'm not wearing anything underneath," and though he now understood it as a cultural gesture of trust, the image it conjured was anything but innocent. He shook his head, forcing his focus back to the road. Survival first, fantasies later. The discs followed, their lights cutting through the night like predatory eyes. Zyra leaned closer, her breath warm against his ear as she pointed to a sharp turn ahead. "There," she whispered, her voice a velvet caress that sent a shiver down his spine. "The ravine narrows, their discs can't maneuver as well as your vehicle." He smirked despite the tension. "This old junker's got heart, hold on." He floored the gas, the engine roaring as they plunged into the ravine, walls of jagged rock rising on either side. The discs hesitated, their movements less certain in the tight space, but one fired a shot that exploded ahead, showering the windshield with dirt. Alex swerved, cursing under his breath, and Zyra's hand tightened on his thigh, her nails, sharp and faintly luminescent, digging in just enough to make his pulse spike. They rounded a bend, and the ravine opened into a clearing, dense forest looming beyond. Alex slammed the brakes, the car skidding to a stop behind a cluster of pines. The disc's hum grew fainter, momentarily confused by the terrain. "Now what?" he asked, turning to her, his chest heaving from adrenaline. Zyra's eyes met his, intense and unreadable, her lips parting slightly as if weighing her next words. "We hide," she said softly, "and we repair what we can." She gestured to the communicator in her hand, its holographic display now showing a schematic of her pod's core, still back in the alley but linked to her device. "If I can boost its signal, I can call for aid from Zerathia." But, she hesitated, her gaze dropping to his lips for a fleeting moment, then back to his eyes. It will take time and trust. The air between them thickened, charged with something beyond the danger outside. Alex swallowed, aware of how close she was, the heat of her body contrasting with the cool night air seeping through the cracked window. "Trust I can do," he said, his voice rougher than intended. "But we need to move. They'll find us soon." She nodded, slipping out of the car with a grace that made his breath catch. Her silver garment shimmered under the moonlight, hugging her curves as she moved to the trunk, where she'd stashed a small toolkit from her pod before they fled. Alex followed, his pistol still in hand, scanning the shadows for movement. The forest was eerily silent, save for the distant hum of the discs, now circling wider, searching. Zyra knelt by a fallen log, her fingers working swiftly to unpack the toolkit, a collection of sleek alien devices that pulsed with faint light. She glanced up at him, her white hair falling over one shoulder, framing her face like a halo. "You're staring," she said, a playful edge to her voice that didn't match the gravity of their situation. He coughed, caught off guard. "Just making sure you're okay. This isn't exactly a walk in the park." Her smile was small but knowing, as if she sensed the undercurrent of his thoughts. "In Zerathia, we learn to find beauty in chaos like this." She gestured to the forest, the stars peeking through the canopy, then to him. "Like you." The words hit him harder than they should have, stirring something deep and primal. He stepped closer, unable to resist the pull, and crouched beside her. "You're not what I expected from an alien princess," he admitted, his voice low, almost a growl. "Most royalty I've heard of don't get their hands dirty." Her laugh was soft, melodic, and it sent a warmth through him that the cold night couldn't touch. "And most humans don't risk their lives for a stranger from the stars." Her hand brushed his as she handed him a glowing tool, her touch lingering just long enough to make his skin tingle. "Hold this. It calibrates the signal." As they worked, their movements synchronized, the tension between them grew, a dance of glances and accidental touches. Zyra explained the device's function in hushed tones, her voice weaving through the night like a siren's call, describing circuits and energy matrices that sounded like poetry to his untrained ears. Her proximity was intoxicating. Each time she leaned in to adjust a setting, her hair brushed his cheek, her scent enveloping him. The silver fabric of her attire shifted, revealing glimpses of her collarbone, her slender neck, and he had to force himself to focus on the task, not the way her body seemed to invite his gaze. But the moment was shattered by a sudden crackle in the air, a scanner's pulse, close and menacing. Zyra froze, her eyes widening. "They're here," she whispered, her voice trembling not with fear but with resolve. She grabbed his hand, pulling him behind the log as a disc hovered into view, its lights sweeping the clearing. Alex's training took over. He pressed himself against her, shielding her body with his, the heat of her form against his chest sending a jolt through him despite the danger. Her breath hitched, her lips inches from his, and for a heartbeat the world narrowed to just them, two souls caught in a cosmic storm. "Stay still," he murmured, his mouth brushing her ear, the contact unintentional but electric. She nodded, her hand gripping his arm, her nails pressing into his skin. The disc passed overhead, its scanners missing them by inches, and Alex's heart pounded, not just from the threat but from her closeness, her trust. As the hum faded, she didn't pull away, her violet eyes searching his, a question lingering in their depths. "We can't stay here," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper, but it carried a weight that made his chest tighten. "The signal isn't strong enough yet. We need to reach higher ground." He nodded, helping her gather the tools, their hands brushing again, each touch a spark in the dark. They moved deeper into the forest, the terrain growing rougher, the air thick with the scent of pine and danger. Zyra's movements were fluid, almost otherworldly, but she stumbled once and Alex caught her, his hands steadying her waist. The contact was brief but searing, her body fitting against his like it was meant to be there. "Sorry," she murmured, but her smile suggested otherwise, a flicker of mischief in her eyes that made his blood heat. "Don't be," he replied, his voice gruff, and he released her reluctantly, hyper-aware of the way her garment clung to her, hinting at the form beneath. That damn whisper, "I'm not wearing anything underneath," played on a loop in his mind, and he cursed himself for letting it distract him. But it wasn't just lust. It was her courage, her openness, that drew him in, making him want to protect her, to understand her. They climbed a ridge, the forest thinning as they reached a rocky outcrop overlooking the ravine. Zyra set up her device again, her fingers dancing over the holographic controls, her focus intense. Alex stood guard, his pistol ready, scanning the horizon where the disk's lights flickered like distant stars. The night was alive with possibility, Danger, yes, but also something deeper, a connection forming between them that defied worlds. As she worked, Zyra glanced at him, her expression softening. In Zerathia, we bond through shared risk, she said, her voice low and intimate. You fight for me, Alex, that means more than you know. He met her gaze, the weight of her words settling over him like a warm blanket. And you trust me, he said, stepping closer, the space between them shrinking. That's not nothing either. Her lips parted, a breath away from his, and for a moment the world held its breath. But a sharp crack echoed below, a branch snapping, too deliberate to be natural. The rebels were closing in, and the fragile moment shattered. Zyra's hand found his, squeezing tight. We finish this, she said, her voice fierce. Together. Alex nodded, his heart racing for reasons beyond the chase. As they prepared to move, the night pulsed with unspoken promises, a dance of danger and desire that was only just beginning. The rocky outcrop where Alex and Zyra crouched was a jagged throne overlooking the ravine, the wind whistling through the pines below as if whispering secrets of the night. Zyra's fingers flew over her holographic device, the faint glow casting shadows across her face, her white hair shimmering like a beacon in the moonlight. Alex's grip tightened on his pistol, his eyes scanning the darkness where the rebels' discs hovered, their lights slicing through the forest like blades. The snap of that branch had been a warning, a predator's misstep, and now the air thrummed with the promise of violence. Zyra's hand, still warm in his, anchored him, but the electric tension between them was now laced with dread. They were cornered, outgunned, and out of time. Almost there, Zyra murmured, her voice a low hum of focus as she calibrated the signal. Her violet eyes flicked to him, a flash of gratitude and something deeper, something that made his chest ache despite the danger. If I can sync this to Zerathia's relay, my allies will come, but we need a few more minutes. Minutes we don't have, Alex growled, his military instincts screaming. The rebels were closing in, he could feel it in the way the air seemed to tighten like a noose. He pulled her closer to the rock's edge, shielding her with his body as he peered down. Shadows moved below, 6, maybe 7 figures, their armored suits glinting with an oily sheen, weapons pulsing with a sickly green light. These weren't amateurs. They moved with precision, fanning out to cut off their escape. Zyra's device beeped softly, a hopeful sound, but her face fell. The signal's weak. This ridge isn't high enough. She looked at him, her expression torn between defiance and desperation. There's a peak nearby, higher ground, if we can reach it. Alex didn't hesitate. Then we move, now. He grabbed her hand, pulling her to her feet, the toolkit tucked under her arm. Her silver garment flowed like liquid starlight, clinging to her curves as she matched his pace, her grace undiminished by the urgency. They scrambled up the slope, rocks crumbling underfoot, the forest a blur of shadow and moonlight. The rebels' hum grew louder, their discs rising from the ravine, scanning beams cutting closer with every second. Halfway up, a plasma bolt exploded against a boulder to their left, showering them with sparks. Alex shoved Zyra behind a tree, his body pressed against hers, the heat of her skin searing through his jacket. Her breath hitched, her lips inches from his, and for a fleeting moment, the world narrowed to the pounding of their hearts. Stay low, he whispered, his voice rough, his hand lingering on her waist, longer than necessary. She nodded, her eyes blazing with a fire that matched his own. You're reckless, human, she said, a hint of a smile breaking through her fear. I like it. He grinned, adrenaline and her proximity making him bold. Good, cause this is about to get crazier. He peeked around the tree, firing 2 quick shots at the nearest rebel. The figure staggered, green blood oozing from its shoulder, but the others pressed forward, their weapons charging with a menacing whine. Zyra tugged at his sleeve, pointing to a narrow path winding toward the peak. There, it's our only chance. They ran, her hand in his, the forest a labyrinth of danger and possibility. The discs swooped closer, their beams grazing the trees, setting branches ablaze. The air smelled of scorched wood and ozone, and Alex's lungs burned, but he pushed on, driven by a need to protect her, to prove that humanity could stand against the stars. They reached the peak, a flat, rocky plateau bathed in moonlight, with a sheer drop on one side and the forest pressing in on the others. Zyra knelt, setting up her device with a speed that spoke of desperation. The holographic display flared brighter, its patterns swirling like a cosmic dance. It's connecting, she said, her voice trembling with hope. Just a little longer, but the rebels were upon them. 3 discs landed with a thud, their hatches hissing open to reveal armored figures, their faces hidden behind visors that glowed with cold malice. The leader stepped forward, a towering figure with a weapon that crackled with energy. Its voice, filtered through a translator, was a guttural rasp. Princess Zyra, your flight ends here. Surrender or the human dies first. Alex raised his pistol, stepping in front of her, his stance unyielding. "You want her? You'll have to go through me." His words were a challenge, a defiance born of years in the trenches, where survival meant staring death in the face and spitting. Zyra's hand touched his back, a silent plea. "Alex, don't." But he was already moving, firing at the leader's visor. The shot cracked the glass, forcing the rebel to stagger back, but the others advanced, their weapons blazing. Alex dove, tackling Zyra to the ground as plasma bolts scorched the air above them. They rolled behind a boulder, her body pressed beneath his, her breath warm against his neck. For a heartbeat, the chaos faded, and it was just them, her curves soft against his frame, her eyes wide with a mix of fear and trust. "Stay down," he growled, but she shook her head, her white hair spilling across the rock. "I fight with you," she said, her voice fierce. From her toolkit, she pulled a small, glowing orb, a weapon, sleek and alien, pulsing with energy. She tossed it with deadly precision, and it detonated in a burst of blue light, sending 2 rebels sprawling, their armor smoking. Alex stared, impressed despite himself. "Nice throw, princess." She smirked, a spark of mischief in her eyes. "You haven't seen anything yet." But the leader recovered, its weapon now aimed directly at Alex. "Enough!" It roared, and a bolt fired faster than he could dodge. Pain erupted in his side, white-hot and blinding, and he stumbled, blood seeping through his jacket. Zyra's scream cut through the haze, her hands catching him as he fell, her strength surprising for her slender frame. "Alex!" Her voice was raw, her violet eyes wide with panic. She dragged him behind the boulder, her fingers pressing against his wound, her touch both gentle and desperate. "Stay with me, please." He gritted his teeth, the pain sharpening his focus. "Not going anywhere," he managed, his hand finding hers, their fingers interlocking. Her skin was cool, her pulse rapid, and the intimacy of the moment grounded him even as the world spun. Zyra's device beeped, louder now, the signal stabilizing. "It's working," she gasped, but her eyes never left his. "Hold on, Alex, help is coming." The rebels closed in, their footsteps heavy, their weapons charging. Alex forced himself to sit up, his vision swimming but his resolve unbroken. He raised his pistol, his hand shaking but steady enough to aim. "Together," he said, echoing her earlier words. She nodded, tears shimmering in her eyes, and activated her orb again, hurling it at the advancing rebels. The explosion rocked the plateau, buying them seconds, but the leader was relentless, its visor now cracked but its intent clear. It raised its weapon, and Alex braced himself, knowing this might be the end. But then a new sound split the night, a deep, resonant hum, like 1,000 engines roaring to life. From the sky descended a sleek, golden ship, its hull gleaming like a second moon. Zerathian markings glowed along its sides, and beams of light lanced down, scattering the rebels in a flurry of panic. Zyra's allies had arrived. She turned to Alex, her face alight with hope, but her hands never left his wound. "We did it," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You did it." He managed a weak smile, the pain fading under the weight of her gaze. "We're not out of this yet, princess." The ship landed, its hatch opening to reveal figures in ornate armor, their weapons trained on the fleeing rebels. But one figure, a woman with hair as white as Zyra's, her presence commanding, strode toward them, her eyes narrowing at the sight of Alex's blood. "Zyra," she said, her voice sharp with concern. "Who is this human?" Zyra's grip on Alex tightened, protective, possessive. "He's the one who saved me," she said, her tone defiant. "And I won't leave him." The woman's gaze softened, but before she could respond, a rebel disc broke free, firing a desperate shot. It struck the boulder, sending shards flying, and Alex pushed Zyra down, shielding her once more. The pain in his side flared, but he held her close, their breaths mingling, their fates intertwined. As the Zerathian soldiers engaged the remaining rebels, the plateau became a battlefield, light and shadow clashing in a symphony of chaos. Zyra's hand found his face, her thumb brushing his cheek, and in her eyes he saw a promise, a bond forged in fire, unbreakable even by the stars. But the battle wasn't over, and the truth of Zyra's world was only beginning to unravel. Who was this woman from the ship, and what price would Alex pay for standing at the side of an alien princess? The plateau was a whirlwind of light and sound, the Zerathian ship's beams carving through the night as the remaining rebels scattered like roaches under a spotlight. Alex clutched Zyra close, his side screaming with pain from the plasma wound, but her touch, her cool fingers against his cheek, her violet eyes locked on his, kept him grounded. The woman from the ship, her white hair braided with metallic threads and her armor gleaming like polished obsidian, stood over them, her expression a mix of regal authority and barely concealed shock. Her name, Zyra had whispered, was Tiva, her elder sister and a commander in Zerathia's fleet. The air crackled with tension, not just from the battle but from the unspoken questions hanging between them. Who was this human? Tiva's gaze seemed to demand. And why was her sister clinging to him like he was her lifeline? Zyra's grip on Alex tightened, her body pressed against his as she faced her sister. Tiva, he's not just any human, she said, her voice steady despite the chaos around them. He risked everything for me. Without him, I'd be dead or captured. Her words carried a fierce protectiveness, and Alex felt a warmth spread through him, dulling the pain in his side. But Tiva's eyes narrowed, her lips pursing as she took in the sight of them, Zyra's silver garments slightly torn from their scramble, Alex's blood staining her hands, and their undeniable closeness. Charming, Tiva said, her tone dry as a desert wind. But we don't have time for whatever this is. She gestured sharply, and 2 Zerathian soldiers moved to flank them, their weapons trained on the horizon where the rebels' discs had retreated. We need to get you aboard, Zyra. The rebels will regroup, and we can't risk you again. Alex forced himself to stand, wincing as the movement sent a fresh wave of pain through his side. Zyra's arm slid around his waist, supporting him, and he couldn't help but notice how perfectly she fit against him, even in the midst of this madness. I'm not leaving him, Zyra said, her voice cutting through the hum of the ship's engines. He comes with us. Tiva's brow arched, her pointed ears twitching slightly, a gesture Alex was starting to recognize as a sign of exasperation. A human on a Zerathian vessel? She glanced at Alex, her violet eyes assessing him like he was a stray dog Zyra had decided to adopt. He's bleeding all over you, sister, and he smells like, what is that, motor oil? Alex snorted, the humor catching him off guard despite the pain. It's called sweat, lady. You try running from alien bounty hunters in a '98 Corolla. Zyra stifled a laugh, her hand tightening on his waist, and for a moment the absurdity of their situation felt almost normal. Tiva's lips twitched, but she didn't smile. Fine, bring your pet human, but he's your responsibility. She turned, striding toward the ship's open hatch, her armor glinting under the moonlight. The soldiers hesitated, their gazes flickering between Zyra and Alex, clearly unsure about this unprecedented breach of protocol. Zyra helped Alex limp toward the ship, her strength surprising for her slender frame. As they crossed the plateau, the ground still warm from plasma burns, Alex couldn't shake the feeling of being watched, not just by the soldiers, but by something deeper, something in the way Zyra's sister kept glancing back, her expression unreadable. The ship's interior was a marvel of sleek, organic curves, its walls pulsing with soft light like a living organism. Alex's boots clunked awkwardly on the smooth floor, a stark contrast to the Zerathian's silent grace, and he felt like a bull in a china shop. They were ushered into a medical bay, where a holographic interface materialized, scanning Alex's wound with a hum. Zyra stayed close, her hand never leaving his arm, and he was hyper-aware of her proximity. The way her silver garment shifted, revealing glimpses of her collarbone, the curve of her hip. That damn whisper, "I'm not wearing anything underneath," flashed through his mind again, and he cursed himself for thinking about it now, with alien tech buzzing around him and Tiva's judgmental eyes boring into his back. The medical drone, a floating orb with tendrils of light, hovered over his wound, emitting a warm sensation that dulled the pain. "This is weird," Alex muttered, watching as the device knitted his flesh together, leaving only a faint scar. "You guys got a hell of a first aid kit." Zyra smiled, her fingers brushing his arm, sending a shiver through him. "Zerathian technology is advanced, but it's your resilience that impresses me." Her voice was soft, intimate, and the room seemed to shrink around them, despite the soldiers standing guard. Tiva cleared her throat loudly, shattering the moment. "If you're done flirting with the patient, Zyra, we have a war to win." She stood at a console, her fingers dancing over holographic controls, pulling up a star map that shimmered in the air. "The rebels have a cloaked ship in orbit. They've been tracking you since Xylo. We need to know why." Zyra's face darkened, her hand slipping from Alex's arm as she stepped toward the map. "They want the Codex," she said, her voice low, almost a growl. "Father entrusted it to me before." She trailed off, pain flickering in her eyes, and Alex felt an urge to reach for her, to ease whatever burden she carried. "The Codex?" he asked, leaning against the medical table, still woozy from the procedure but determined to keep up. "What's that?" Tiva shot him a look that could have frozen lava. "It's not your concern, human," but Zyra shook her head, turning to him, her expression open in a way that made his heart skip. "It's a data core," she explained, containing the genetic and cultural history of Zerathia. "It's our legacy and a weapon if it falls into the wrong hands. The rebels believe it holds the key to controlling our people's minds, bending them to their will." Alex whistled, the implications hitting him hard. So, what? It's like a galactic hard drive with a side of mind control? No wonder they are after you. Tiva's ears twitched again, and she muttered something in Zerathian that sounded suspiciously like a curse. He's quick, I'll give him that, she said, her tone dripping with sarcasm. But he's still a liability. Zyra, you can't seriously think. I trust him, Zyra cut in, her voice sharp, her eyes blazing as she faced her sister. He's proven himself more than your soldiers ever could. The room fell silent, the soldiers exchanging uneasy glances, and Alex felt a flush of pride mixed with embarrassment. Being defended by an alien princess wasn't exactly in his life plan, but damn if it didn't feel good. Before Tiva could retort, an alarm blared, red lights pulsing through the ship. A soldier rushed in, his armor dented from combat. Commander, the rebels have decloaked, they're launching fighters. Tiva swore, her composure cracking. Get to the bridge. Zyra, you're with me. Human, she paused, eyeing Alex like he was a puzzle she couldn't solve. Try not to break anything. Alex grinned undeterred. No promises. He caught Zyra's eye, and she gave him a quick, conspiratorial smile that sent a jolt through him. As Tiva marched out, Zyra lingered, helping him to his feet, her touch lingering on his arm. Come with me, she said softly, guiding him through the ship's winding corridors. The walls pulsed faster now, matching the urgency of the alarms, and Alex's head spun, not just from the tech, but from the way Zyra's hip brushed against his as they moved. They reached a small chamber off the bridge, where a viewscreen displayed the chaos outside. Sleek, dagger-shaped rebel fighters swarming the Zerathian ship like wasps. Zyra pulled him to a console, her fingers flying over controls. I need your help, she said, her voice urgent but warm. Your human ingenuity. Can you help me reroute power to the shields? Our systems are intuitive, but I've seen how you think outside the rules. He blinked, caught off guard. Me, I'm no engineer, I'm just a grunt with a gun. Her laugh was bright, cutting through the tension. And yet you outran a rebel disc in that, what did you call it? Junker? She leaned closer, her breath grazing his ear, and his heart did a somersault. Trust yourself, Alex, like I trust you. The moment was electric, but the ship shuddered, a rebel fighter's blast rocking them. Alex steadied himself, his hand brushing hers, and he nodded. All right, princess, let's save your ship. He dove into the controls, guided by her instructions, his fingers clumsy but determined. The interface felt alive, responding to his touch like it was reading his intent, and he couldn't help but wonder if Zyra's trust was somehow amplifying his ability. As they worked, a rebel fighter broke through, its blast shaking the chamber. Zyra stumbled, falling into Alex's arms, her body pressed against his, her silver garment slipping slightly to reveal the smooth curve of her shoulder. Oops, she murmured, her lips curving into a sheepish smile, her eyes dancing with mischief. Alex chuckled, despite the chaos. You're gonna get us both killed, you know that? Her laugh was a melody, and she pressed a quick kiss to his cheek, light as a feather but searing like a brand. Worth it, she whispered, before pulling back to the console, leaving him dazed and grinning like an idiot. The ship rocked again, and Tiva's voice crackled over the intercom. Zyra, get to the bridge now. The urgency snapped them back to reality, but as they ran, hands brushing, Alex knew this was more than a fight for survival. It was a dance of trust, desire, and defiance, and they were just getting started. The ship's corridors pulsed with red light, the alarms a relentless heartbeat as Alex and Zyra sprinted toward the bridge, their hands brushing with every stride, a silent tether in the chaos. The Zerathian vessel shuddered again, rebel fighters hammering its shields, and the air was thick with the scent of ozone and tension. Zyra's silver garment clung to her curves, shifting with her movements, and Alex couldn't help but steal glances, her grace under pressure pulling him like gravity. That kiss on his cheek, light, fleeting, but burning like a star, lingered in his mind, stirring a warmth that battled the chill of fear. Tiva's voice crackled through the intercom, sharp and commanding, but Zyra's defiant smile as they ran told Alex she was done following orders. They were in this together, and the rules of her world were bending under the weight of their bond. They burst onto the bridge, a cavernous space of sleek consoles and holographic displays, where Tiva stood like a storm's eye, barking orders to her crew. The viewscreen showed the rebel fighters weaving through space, their green plasma bolts clashing against the golden glow of the ship's shields. Zyra pulled Alex to a side console, her fingers dancing over the controls, her white hair spilling over her shoulders like a cascade of moonlight. We need to boost the shields, she said, her voice low but urgent, her violet eyes catching his. You did well back there. Can you handle this? Alex nodded, his hands still tingling from their earlier work, the alien tech somehow intuitive under her guidance. Let's keep this ship in one piece, he said, flashing a grin despite the chaos. He leaned in beside her, their shoulders brushing, and the contact sent a jolt through him, heightened by the danger outside. Her scent, jasmine and something cosmic, wrapped around him, making it hard to focus on the holographic interface pulsing under his fingers. As they worked, rerouting power with a rhythm that felt almost like a dance, the ship stabilized, the shields flaring brighter. But the rebels pressed harder, a fighter breaking through to land a direct hit. The bridge rocked and Zyra stumbled, her body falling against Alex's, her curves pressing into him in a way that made his breath catch. Her hands gripped his arms, steadying herself, and for a moment the world narrowed to the heat of her body, the rapid rise and fall of her chest, and the way her lips parted so close he could feel her breath. "Sorry," she murmured, but her eyes held a spark of mischief, and she didn't pull away. The silver fabric of her garment had slipped slightly, revealing the smooth curve of her neck and a hint of her collarbone, and Alex's pulse raced, his mind flashing to her whispered confession, "I'm not wearing anything underneath." It wasn't just a cultural gesture anymore. It was a promise, a challenge, and it stirred something deep and primal within him. He cleared his throat, forcing his focus back to the console, but his voice was rough. "You're making this hard, princess." Her laugh was soft, a melody that cut through the alarms. "Good," she whispered, her fingers brushing his as she adjusted a setting, the touch deliberate and electric. "In Zerathia, we embrace the chaos of connection. It makes us stronger." The words hung between them, heavy with meaning, and Alex felt the air shift, charged with an intimacy that was both thrilling and dangerous. The bridge was a flurry of activity, soldiers shouting coordinates, Tiva's voice cutting through the din, but for Alex and Zyra, it was as if they were alone, their shared purpose weaving a cocoon around them. Her hand lingered on his, guiding his fingers over the controls, and each touch was a spark, building a fire he wasn't sure he could contain. The ship lurched again, and Tiva's voice snapped them back. "Zyra, shields at 60%, focus." Her sister's glare was a mix of frustration and suspicion, and Alex caught the way her eyes lingered on their closeness, her pointed ears twitching with disapproval. Zyra ignored her, leaning closer to Alex, her voice a husky whisper. "We need to overload the relay to send a distress signal. It's risky, but it's our only chance." Her lips were inches from his ear, her breath warm, and the intimacy of her tone sent a shiver down his spine. He nodded, following her lead, their hands moving in sync, the console responding to their combined efforts like it was an extension of their will. As the signal pulsed, a low hum building to a crescendo, the ship stabilized, but the rebels weren't done. A fighter swooped in, its blast shaking the bridge, and a panel sparked overhead, showering them with embers. Alex pulled Zyra down, shielding her as they ducked beneath the console, their bodies pressed together in the cramped space. Her face was close, her violet eyes wide, reflecting the flickering lights, and for a heartbeat, the world was just them, her warmth, her scent, the curve of her body against his. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice low, his hand resting on her waist, the fabric of her garment smooth under his fingers. She nodded, her lips curving into a smile that was equal parts relief and invitation. "More than okay," she murmured, her hand sliding up his chest, resting over his heart. The gesture was intimate, vulnerable, and it stirred a longing he hadn't felt in years. "You keep saving me, Alex, in my culture. That means something deep." He swallowed, his throat dry, the heat of her touch igniting a fire he couldn't ignore. "Yeah, and what's that mean?" His voice was rough, teasing, but his eyes held hers, searching for the truth. Her smile widened, a hint of mischief in her gaze. "It means you're mine," she said softly, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw, the contact sending a rush through him. "At least until we're safe." The words were a jolt, a promise wrapped in danger, and Alex felt his restraint slipping. He leaned closer, their lips a breath apart, the tension between them a living thing. But before he could close the distance, the console beeped, the signal locking onto Zerathia's relay. Zyra's eyes widened, and she pulled back, her focus snapping to the task, though her hand lingered on his chest, a silent acknowledgement of what had almost happened. "We did it," she said, her voice breathless, as the holographic display flared green, confirming the signal's transmission. "Help is coming," but the moment of triumph was short-lived. The view screen flashed, showing a massive rebel ship decloaking in orbit, its hull bristling with weapons. Tiva's voice cut through the bridge. "They're locking onto us. Brace for impact." The ship shuddered violently, throwing Alex and Zyra against the console. Her body pressed against his again, her arms wrapping around him for balance, and the contact was a lifeline in the chaos. As the bridge erupted in shouts and sparks, Zyra's eyes met his, a silent vow passing between them. "We're not done," she whispered, her voice fierce, her lips so close he could almost taste them. Alex grinned, his heart pounding with more than just adrenaline. Not by a long shot. Princess? He helped her to her feet, their hands entwined, and as the rebel ship loomed larger, he knew this wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about her, about them, and the fire they'd ignited in the heart of a cosmic storm. The ship rocked again, and Tiva's voice roared for them to man the defenses. Zyra pulled Alex toward a weapons station, her movements fluid, her determination infectious. As they prepared to fight, their shoulders brushing, their breath sinking, Alex felt the weight of her trust, her desire, and it fueled him. The rebels might have the firepower, but he had something they didn't, a bond with a princess from the stars, and a human heart that refused to break. As the first rebel salvo struck, shaking the ship to its core, Zyra's hand found his, squeezing tight. "Together," she said, her voice a beacon in the dark. "Always," he replied, and they dove into the fight, their connection a spark that could light up the galaxy, or burn it down. The Zerathian ship trembled under the rebel onslaught, the bridge a chaotic symphony of blaring alarms, shouting soldiers, and the crackle of overloaded systems. Alex and Zyra stood shoulder to shoulder at the weapons station, their hands moving in sync over the holographic controls, firing precise bursts of energy at the rebel fighters swarming the view screen. Her fingers brushed his with every adjustment, a fleeting touch that sent sparks through him, grounding him in the midst of the storm. Zyra's violet eyes were fierce, her white hair glowing under the bridge's pulsing lights, and her silver garment clung to her like a second skin, accentuating every curve as she leaned into the fight. Their wordless vow, together, hung between them, a lifeline stronger than the ship's faltering shields. But as the rebel mothership loomed closer, its weapons charging with a menacing glow, Alex felt a chill that had nothing to do with the battle. "Shields at 30%. Tiva barked from the command console, her voice cutting through the chaos like a blade. Her armored figure was a pillar of authority, but her pointed ears twitched with barely concealed panic. "Zyra, the signal, did it reach the fleet?" Zyra's hands froze on the controls, her eyes flicking to the holographic display beside her. The green pulse of the distress signal blinked steadily, a faint hope in the darkness. "It's through," she said, her voice steady but strained. "But they're light years away. We need to hold out." Alex fired another volley, downing a rebel fighter in a burst of flame, but his gut twisted. Hold out? Against that monstrosity in orbit? He glanced at Zyra, her face set in determination, and felt a surge of protectiveness. "We'll make it," he said, more to her than to himself, his hand brushing hers again, the contact a silent promise. She met his gaze, her lips curving into a smile that was equal parts defiance and warmth. "With you, I believe we can." Her voice was soft, intimate, and for a moment the battle faded, leaving only the heat of her presence, the memory of her whispered confession. "I'm not wearing anything underneath," and the unspoken pull between them. But the ship lurched, a direct hit shaking the bridge, and reality snapped back. Tiva's voice roared over the intercom. "All hands brace for boarding, they're breaching the lower decks." The view screen flickered, showing rebel pods latching onto the ship's hull like parasitic insects, their drills sparking as they cut through. Alex's military instincts kicked in. "Boarding?" he muttered, grabbing Zyra's arm. "We need to move, they'll come for you." Her eyes widened, but she nodded, snatching her glowing orb weapon from the console. They sprinted toward the corridor, Tiva's soldiers forming a defensive line behind them, their weapons humming with energy. The ship's interior was a maze of pulsing walls and flickering lights, the air thick with the scent of scorched metal. Zyra led the way, her movements fluid, her silver garment shimmering as she navigated the labyrinth with a grace that made Alex's heart race. They reached a sealed hatch, a choke point to the lower decks, and she knelt to override the lock, her fingers dancing over a holographic panel. "If we can hold them here," she said, "we might buy enough time for the fleet." But as the hatch hissed open, a figure emerged from the shadows, not a rebel but a Zerathian in ornate armor, her white hair braided with gold, her violet eyes cold and calculating. She was older than Zyra, her presence regal yet menacing, and Alex's instincts screamed danger. Zyra froze, her breath catching, her hand tightening on his arm. "Vexa," Zyra whispered, her voice laced with dread. "What are you doing here?" Alex's grip on his pistol tightened, his eyes narrowing. "Friend of yours." Vexa's lips curled into a smile that was all sharp edges, her pointed ears twitching as she stepped closer, her armor glinting under the dim lights. "Sister," she corrected, her voice smooth as silk but cold as ice. "Zyra's elder sister, and the true heir to Zerathia." The words hit like a plasma bolt, and Alex felt the ground shift beneath him. "Sister?" Tiva was Zyra's sister, the commander who'd grudgingly accepted him. But Vexa, her presence was a blade in the dark, and the way Zyra's hand trembled in his told him this was no family reunion. "You're with the rebels," Zyra said, her voice breaking, not with fear but with betrayal. "You betrayed Father, you betrayed us all." Vexa laughed, a sound that sent a chill down Alex's spine. "Betrayed, I liberated us. Father's vision was weak, clinging to old traditions. The Codex will make Zerathia unstoppable, and I will wield it, not you." She stepped closer, her eyes flicking to Alex, assessing him like prey. "And this, human, you debase yourself, Zyra, clinging to this primitive creature." Alex bristled, stepping in front of Zyra, his pistol raised. "Primitive or not, I'm the one standing between you and her. Back off." Vex's smile widened, amused, and she raised a hand, a sleek weapon materializing in her grip. "Bold, I see why she likes you, but you're out of your depth, human." Before Alex could respond, the hatch behind Vexa burst open and rebel soldiers poured through, their weapons blazing. Alex dove, pulling Zyra with him as plasma bolts scorched the walls. They rolled behind a bulkhead, her body pressed against his, her breath hot against his neck. "She's lying," Zyra whispered, her voice fierce but trembling. "The Codex isn't just a weapon, it's me." Alex's heart stopped, his eyes locking onto hers. "What?" Her violet eyes shimmered with tears, but her jaw was set. "The Codex isn't just data, it's encoded in my DNA. That's why they want me, not just to control Zerathia, but to rewrite it. Vexa wants to erase our history and make herself a god." The revelation hit like a supernova, rewriting everything Alex thought he knew. Zyra wasn't just a princess, she was the key to her world's survival or its destruction. The weight of it crashed over him, but so did a fierce resolve. He cupped her face, his thumb brushing her cheek, grounding her as much as himself. "Then we keep you safe," he said, his voice low, unyielding. "No matter what." Her lips parted, a breath away from his, and for a heartbeat the battle faded, their connection a fire that burned brighter than the chaos. But Vex's voice cut through, sharp and mocking. "How touching. But you can't hide, Zyra. The Codex is mine." The rebels advanced, their weapons trained, and Alex pulled Zyra to her feet, his mind racing. Tiva's soldiers were holding the line, but they were outnumbered, and Vex's presence changed everything. "We need to get to the bridge," he said, his voice urgent. "Tiva needs to know." Zyra nodded, her orb weapon glowing in her hand. "There's a service tunnel. Follow me." They slipped through a side panel, the narrow passage barely wide enough for them to move single file, their bodies brushing with every step. The air was tight, charged with the heat of their closeness, and Alex felt the pull of her strength, her vulnerability, her trust, drawing him deeper into her orbit. The tunnel shook as another explosion rocked the ship, and Zyra stumbled, her back pressing against his chest. He steadied her, his hands on her hips, the silver fabric smooth under his fingers. "You okay?" he asked, his voice rough, the intimacy of the moment cutting through the danger. She turned, her face inches from his, her eyes searching his. "With you I am," she said softly, her hand resting on his chest, her touch a spark in the dark. "But Vexa, she'll kill you to get to me." "Let her try," Alex growled, his hand tightening on her waist, a protective instinct flaring. "I've faced worse odds." Her smile was fleeting but fierce, and she pressed a quick kiss to his jaw, a gesture that sent a rush through him. "You're impossible," she murmured, before pulling him forward, the tunnel leading them toward the bridge. But as they emerged, the view screen showed the rebel mothership firing a massive beam, the shields buckling under its force. Tiva's voice was a desperate shout. "We're losing power. Zyra, where are you?" Zyra's hand found Alex's, squeezing tight. "We're here," she called, stepping onto the bridge, but her eyes were on him, a silent plea. The twist of Vex's betrayal and Zyra's secret had changed everything, but their bond was unshaken. As the ship groaned under the rebel assault, Alex knew they were fighting not just for survival, but for a truth that could reshape the stars and a love that defied them. The bridge of the Zerathian ship was a tempest of flashing lights and desperate voices, the view screen ablaze with the rebel mothership's relentless assault. Its massive beam tore at the shields, each hit sending tremors through the deck, making the sleek consoles spark and flicker. Alex and Zyra emerged from the service tunnel, her hand still gripping his, her touch a steadying force amid the chaos. Her violet eyes, wide with the weight of her revealed secret, that she was the living Codex, the key to Zerathia's future, locked onto his for a fleeting moment, a silent vow that bound them tighter than the ship's crumbling defenses. But the reality of Vex's betrayal, her sister-turned traitor, hung over them like a dark star, and the air crackled with the urgency of survival. Tiva spun from her command console, her braided white hair glinting under the pulsing lights, her face a mask of fury and disbelief. "Zyra," she snapped, her pointed ears twitching as she took in their disheveled state, Alex's blood-stained jacket, Zyra's torn silver garment clinging to her curves, and their hands still entwined. "Where have you been, and why is he still here?" Her gaze flicked to Alex, her tone dripping with exasperation, as if he were a stray dog that kept following her sister home. Alex flashed a wry grin, undeterred by her disdain. "Nice to see you too, Commander. Just thought I'd stick around for the fireworks." The ship rocked again, and he braced himself against a console, wincing as his freshly healed wound protested. Zyra's hand tightened on his, her touch grounding him, and he caught the faintest smile on her lips, a spark of mischief that made his heart skip despite the chaos. "Enough," Tiva barked, but her eyes softened as they landed on Zyra. "The distress signal worked, our fleet is en route, but we need to hold this ship together until they arrive. And you," she pointed at Zyra, her voice dropping to a hiss. "Vex is here, on our ship." Zyra nodded, her face pale but resolute. "She's leading the rebels. She wants the Codex, she wants me." Her voice trembled, not with fear but with the raw pain of betrayal, and Alex felt a surge of protectiveness, his hand instinctively moving to her waist, steadying her. The gesture didn't go unnoticed. Tiva's eyes narrowed, and a soldier nearby coughed awkwardly, pretending to adjust his weapon. "Great," Alex muttered, loud enough for the room to hear. "Family drama and an alien invasion. My Tuesday nights are usually pizza and Netflix, you know." Zyra stifled a laugh, her hand brushing his arm, and the brief moment of levity felt like a lifeline in the storm. Tiva rolled her eyes, her ears twitching again. "Focus, human. If Vex is aboard, she'll head for the core, the ship's heart. If she disables it, we're dead in space." She turned to her crew, barking orders to secure the lower decks, but her gaze lingered on Zyra, a silent question in her eyes. "Asterisk, can you trust him?" Asterisk. Zyra answered without words, stepping closer to Alex, her body brushing his in a way that sent a jolt through him. "We'll stop her," she said, her voice firm, her violet eyes blazing with determination. "Alex and I, together." Tiva's lips pursed, but she didn't argue. "Fine, but if he slows you down, I'm throwing him out an airlock myself." She gestured to a soldier, who handed Zyra a sleek, glowing rifle, its design as elegant as it was deadly. Zyra passed Alex a smaller weapon, a pistol-like device that hummed in his hand, and he raised an eyebrow. "This thing got a safety?" he asked, turning it over, half expecting it to zap him. Zyra's smile was teasing, her fingers brushing his as she showed him the trigger. "Point and shoot, soldier. You're a natural." Her touch lingered, her gaze holding his, and the air between them thickened, charged with an intimacy that made the bridge feel too small. The ship shuddered again, a deep groan echoing through the hull, and Tiva's voice cut through. "Move, now!" Zyra grabbed Alex's hand, pulling him toward a side corridor, the rifle slung over her shoulder, her silver garment shimmering as she moved. The corridor was narrow, the walls pulsing with faint light, and their footsteps echoed in sync, a rhythm that matched the pounding of Alex's heart. They reached a junction, where the air grew hotter, the hum of the ship's core audible through the walls. Zyra paused, scanning a holographic map projected from her wrist device, her face tense. "The core's close, but Vex is smart. She'll have guards." Her eyes met his, a flicker of vulnerability breaking through her resolve. "Alex, if anything happens to me." "Don't," he cut in, his voice rough, stepping closer until their faces were inches apart. "Nothing's happening to you. Not on my watch." His hand cupped her cheek, his thumb brushing her skin, and her breath hitched, her lips parting as if to speak. The moment was electric, but the sound of boots clanging in the distance snapped them back. Zyra nodded, her hand covering his for a brief, searing moment. "Then let's end this." They moved forward, weapons ready, but the corridor opened into a vast chamber, the ship's core, a towering cylinder of light and energy, pulsing like a heartbeat. And there, standing before it, was Vexa, flanked by 4 rebel soldiers, their weapons trained on the entrance. Well, Vexa purred, her voice dripping with mockery, her gold-braided hair gleaming under the core's glow. "My little sister and her pet human, how quaint." Her eyes raked over Alex, lingering on his disheveled state, and she smirked. "Really, Zyra, you could do better." Alex snorted, raising his weapon. Says the one playing space pirate. "Step away from the glowy thing, lady, or this gets messy." Vexa laughed, but her soldiers advanced, their weapons charging with a menacing whine. Zyra stepped forward, her rifle aimed, her posture regal despite the tension. "You don't have to do this, Vexa. The Codex isn't yours to take, it's our people's soul." Vexa's smile vanished, her eyes cold. "Soul, it's power, Zyra, and I'll wield it." She gestured, and the soldiers fired, plasma bolts scorching the air. Alex dove, pulling Zyra behind a console, his body shielding hers as sparks rained down. Her breath was hot against his neck, her hands gripping his shoulders, and the closeness was dizzying even as the battle raged. "You okay?" he whispered, his lips brushing her ear, the contact unintentional but electric. She nodded, her eyes blazing. "Let's show her what humans can do." She fired her rifle, the beam catching a rebel in the chest, sending him sprawling. Alex followed suit, his pistol humming as he took down another, his aim steady despite the chaos. But Vexa was fast, dodging behind the core, her weapon firing a blast that grazed Alex's arm, searing pain flaring. Zyra's cry was sharp, her hand reaching for him, but he shook his head, grinning through the pain. "Just a scratch, princess. Keep going." Her laugh was half sob, half defiance, and she fired again, her movements fluid, her silver garment slipping slightly to reveal the curve of her shoulder, a distraction Alex couldn't afford but couldn't ignore. They fought as a unit, their movements synchronized, but Vexa was relentless, her soldiers pushing them back. The core pulsed faster, its light unstable, and Alex realized she was tampering with it, risking a meltdown. "She's gonna blow this thing," he shouted, grabbing Zyra's arm. "We need to stop her now." Zyra nodded, her eyes fierce, and they charged, weaving through bolts and debris. But as they reached the core, Vexa turned, her weapon aimed at Zyra's heart. "Last chance. Sister," she hissed. "Give me the Codex or I end you both." Alex's heart pounded, his body moving before his mind could catch up. He tackled Zyra out of the way, the blast missing her by inches, and they crashed to the floor, her body beneath his, her breath ragged. "You idiot," she gasped, her hands clutching his face, her eyes wide with fear and something deeper. "Don't do that again." He grinned, his face inches from hers. No promises. But before they could rise, Vex's laugh echoed, and the core's light flared, a warning of imminent collapse. The ship was seconds from disaster, and their fate hung in the balance, bound by trust, defiance, and a spark that could ignite the stars or destroy them. The core chamber of the Zerathian ship pulsed with a frantic, blinding light, its rhythmic hum now a chaotic scream as Vex's tampering pushed it toward a catastrophic meltdown. Alex and Zyra lay tangled on the floor, her body warm beneath his, her violet eyes wide with a mix of fear and fierce determination. Her hands still clutched his face, her breath ragged from their narrow escape from Vex's blast, and the air between them crackled with an intimacy that defied the chaos. The rebel leader, Zyra's traitorous sister, stood before the core, her gold-braided hair glinting in the unstable glow, her weapon trained on them as she sneered. "You can't stop this, Zyra," Vexa taunted, her voice sharp as a blade. "The Codex is mine, and Zerathia will kneel to me." Alex's heart pounded, his arm stinging from the graze of her last shot, but he forced himself to his feet, pulling Zyra up with him, his hand lingering on her waist. Her silver garment was torn at the shoulder, revealing the smooth curve of her skin, and though the sight stirred him, it was her unwavering resolve that anchored him. "She's wrong," he murmured, his voice low, meant only for her. "You're stronger than she'll ever be." Zyra's lips curved into a faint smile, her hand squeezing his, her touch a lifeline in the storm. "Together," she whispered, echoing their vow, and the word carried a weight that made the chaos feel conquerable. But the core's light flared brighter, the chamber trembling as cracks spiderwebbed across the walls, and Alex knew they had seconds to act. Vexa laughed, her weapon charging with a menacing whine. "Sentimental fools. The Codex in your blood will rewrite our world, Zyra, and your human pet won't save you." She fired, the plasma bolt searing the air, but Alex was faster, shoving Zyra aside and diving behind a console. The blast scorched the floor where they'd stood, and Zyra's cry of frustration was a spark that ignited his resolve. "We need to shut it down," Zyra shouted, scrambling to his side, her rifle glowing in her hands. She fired back, her beam catching a rebel soldier in the shoulder, sending him sprawling. Alex joined her, his alien pistol humming as he took down another, his aim steady despite the pain in his arm. The remaining rebels closed in, but the core's instability was the real threat, its energy spiking, threatening to tear the ship apart. Zyra's eyes darted to a control panel near the core, its holographic interface flickering erratically. "If I can reach it, I can reroute the energy," she said, her voice urgent but steady. "But I need you to cover me." Alex nodded, his grin fierce despite the odds. "Got your back, princess." He fired a volley, forcing Vexa and her soldiers to duck, and Zyra sprinted toward the panel, her silver garment flowing like liquid starlight. The sight of her, graceful, fearless, her white hair streaming behind her, was a vision that burned into his mind, fueling his fight. Vexa snarled, redirecting her aim at Zyra, but Alex was there, tackling her to the ground. They grappled, her strength surprising for her lithe frame, her armored elbow catching his jaw with a crack. Pain flared, but he held on, pinning her arm, his military training kicking in. "You're done, Vexa," he growled, wrenching her weapon free and tossing it aside. She hissed, her violet eyes blazing with hatred, but before she could retaliate, a deep rumble shook the ship, not from the core, but from above. The viewscreen in the chamber flared to life, showing a fleet of Zerathian ships emerging from hyperspace, their golden hulls gleaming like a sunrise. Tiva's voice crackled through the intercom, triumphant yet strained. "Reinforcements have arrived. Hold the core, Zyra." Vex's face twisted with rage, but her soldiers faltered, their resolve crumbling as the tide turned. Zyra reached the panel, her fingers flying over the controls, her face set in concentration. The core's light stabilized, its hum softening, but Vexa wasn't done. She broke free from Alex, lunging for Zyra with a dagger that materialized from her armor, its blade glowing with a sickly green light. "Zyra!" Alex shouted, diving forward. He caught Vex's wrist just as the blade grazed Zyra's arm, drawing a thin line of lavender blood. Zyra gasped but didn't falter, her hands still working the controls, and Alex twisted Vex's arm, forcing her to drop the dagger. He shoved her back, standing between her and Zyra, his chest heaving, his pistol aimed at her heart. "Enough," he said, his voice low and deadly. "You've lost." Vex's eyes flickered to the viewscreen where rebel fighters were retreating under the Zerathian fleet's onslaught. Her shoulders slumped, the fight draining from her, and she sank to her knees, her gold braids falling loose. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice broken. "I wanted to save us to make us strong." Zyra stepped forward, her arm bleeding but her gaze unwavering. "You wanted power, Vexa, not salvation." She turned to the panel, inputting a final command, and the core's light steadied, its hum now a gentle pulse. The ship was safe, the meltdown averted, and the rebels were in retreat. Tiva burst into the chamber with a squad of soldiers, their weapons trained on Vexa, who offered no resistance as they bound her hands with glowing cuffs. Tiva's eyes softened as they landed on Zyra, then narrowed at Alex, still standing protectively at her side. "You're still here," she said, her tone grudgingly impressed. "Maybe you're not entirely useless." Alex chuckled, wincing as he touched his bruised jaw. "High praise, Commander, I'll take it." Zyra's laugh was soft, her hand finding his, and the warmth of her touch washed away the pain. The chamber quieted, the battle's chaos giving way to a fragile calm. Tiva oversaw Vex's removal, her sister's head bowed in defeat, and the soldiers secured the core. But for Alex and Zyra, the moment was theirs. She turned to him, her violet eyes shimmering with gratitude and something deeper, something that made his heart race. "You saved me," she said softly, stepping closer, her silver garment brushing against him. "Again." He grinned, his hand resting on her waist, the contact natural now, inevitable. "Told you, princess, not on my watch." Her smile was radiant, and she leaned in, her lips brushing his in a kiss that was soft but searing, a promise fulfilled in the aftermath of war. The bridge crew pretended not to notice, though a few smirks were exchanged, and Tiva's exasperated sigh was audible across the room. As the kiss broke, Zyra rested her forehead against his, her breath warm against his skin. "In Zerathia, saving a life binds you to that soul," she murmured, her voice intimate, teasing. "You're stuck with me now, Alex." He laughed, pulling her closer, heedless of the audience. "Good, 'cause I'm not going anywhere." The words were a vow, not just to her but to the life they'd stumbled into, a life where a human soldier and an alien princess could rewrite the stars. Days later, the Zerathian fleet escorted the ship back to their homeworld, a planet of crystalline spires and endless auroras, just as Zyra had described. Vexa faced trial, her rebellion crushed, and the Codex, Zyra's very essence, was safeguarded, its secrets preserved for peace, not conquest. Alex, the unlikely hero, stood at Zyra's side as she addressed her people, her voice ringing with hope, her hand never leaving his. Tiva, grudgingly, offered him a place among them, muttering about humans and their reckless charm. But Alex's choice was already made. He and Zyra built a life between worlds, her grace and his grit a perfect balance, their love a bridge across galaxies. The whisper that had started it all, "I'm not wearing anything underneath," became their private joke, a symbol of trust that had sparked a bond stronger than any weapon. As they stood on a balcony overlooking Zerathia's glowing skies, Zyra's white hair catching the aurora's light, Alex pulled her close, his voice low. "You think Earth's ready for a princess like you?" She laughed, her eyes dancing. "Are you ready for a world like mine?" He kissed her, the answer clear in the warmth of their embrace. Together they'd face anything, rebels, wars, or the vast unknown. For in the clash of human heart and alien soul, they'd found a love that could light the cosmos, a story written not just in the stars, but in their beating hearts.